Morena, gentlemen. Welcome to another tremendous day of online learning. So today's class kicks off by reviewing yesterday's activity, which was task 13 on page 21 of the workbook. So today we're looking at an honest pricing mistake question. So in our question, the business could be found to be not guilty of making an unsubstantiated representation about price. This is because the $15 pricing of the laptop was an honest pricing mistake. This is due to the obvious error of not including the additional zeros in the price to make it $1,500. So it was honest in the sense that it was a genuine mistake that our shopkeeper Stephen has identified, and it is somewhat reasonable to have simply left off those two zeros when typing in the price. So a customer could not reasonably expect to purchase a laptop for $15. So the price itself was set at an unreasonable level due to the mistake that was made. And the fact that Stephen, the shopkeeper, apologizes and corrects the price immediately is going to mean that Stephen should be protected by the FTA's exception to making an unsubstantiated representation. Because correcting that price immediately is going to mean that further consumers aren't misled about the actual price. However, if Stephen was found to be making these pricing mistakes regularly, though, then it might be found that, in fact, this is an unsubstantiated representation because it could represent a pattern of deliberate deception around pricing errors. But if it's a one-off mistake, as it seems to be in the question, and it's a reasonable mistake to have left off those two zeros, then it should be protected as an exception to making an unsubstantiated representation. So moving to consider the final slide for our Fair Trading Act topic, the Commerce Commission. The Commerce Commission is a government organisation that is responsible for enforcing the Fair Trading Act. So the Commerce Commission is set up by the government and it investigates businesses to ensure that they're following the requirements of the Fair Trading Act. They can also provide advice to businesses on how to comply, and that might mean at the time that they've investigated a business and found an issue, or else it could be just general advice that they're issuing to businesses generally, just to give them confidence, those businesses, of how they can follow the Fair Trading Act. The Commerce Commission will also issue warnings if they find a business in breach or one that they think could be in breach of the Fair Trading Act. And finally, the Commerce Commission can also take businesses to court for those breaches of the Fair Trading Act. And the court, in finding breaches of our Fair Trading Act, can issue significant fines and other penalties to the owners of the business. When a consumer experiences a breach of the Fair Trading Act, they can seek compensation through our favourite disputes tribunal, or they can make a complaint to the Commerce Commission to investigate. If that claim, of course, for loss resulting to the breach of the FTA is greater than $30,000, then the consumer could expect that the claim is likely to head to the District Court or even the High Court. And contacting the Commerce Commission is fairly easy for our consumers. They can simply give it a call, got our number listed here, or they can submit a complaint online. That represents the end of the Fair Trading Act, gentlemen. So as promised yesterday, we're going to crack into an introduction to contract law. Now, just to reiterate, contract law is a non-examinable topic for the quirks of our rather unique COVID-afflicted year, but nonetheless, we're going to crack into contract law. So a contract is an agreement between two or more persons or businesses, and we call persons or businesses that are in an agreement to be parties to a contract, and a contract creates rights and duties that are legally enforceable. And legally enforceable means that a party could go to court to get the other person or business to the agreement to respect their rights or fulfill duties. And a right is something that a party or a person or a business is entitled to. So I have a right to something. So for example, employees under their employment contract have a right to take sick leave when they are sick. On the other hand, a duty is an obligation to do something. It is a requirement to carry out an action or do something as required under an agreement or a contract. So employees, as part of an employment contract, have a duty to follow the employer's health and safety policy and procedures. A promise or agreement to do something does not necessarily make it a contract. So a general promise, such as what Mr. Noyce is giving to his students here, where he says, I'll give all of my students a chocolate bar on their birthday, despite it coming across as something of an agreement, it's a promise rather that is not a contract under the law. So because, and we're going to have a look at why such a promise is not a contract, but if a promise is not a contract, it's not legally enforceable, and one cannot go to court to get the other party to carry out what they've promised. So we're going to be looking at the elements of a valid contract in just a moment, and that's what makes an agreement legally enforceable. If an agreement or promise is not legally enforceable, we can call it voidable. So voidable means that the parties are not required to take any action. There's no way that the promise is going to be legally enforced by the law, so it is voidable. Just a little bit of extra language there for our vocabs. The elements of a valid contract. We're going to be looking at 6 of these elements of a valid contract. The first one is that it must be serious and commercial, so i.e. not a casual promise. So Mr. Noyce promising a chocolate bar to each of his students on their birthdays, that would not be considered a serious and commercial agreement. So where parties or persons are making joking or fun or nonchalant promises, casual promises to each other, they would not be considered a valid contract under the law because they aren't serious and commercial commitments or promises. Offer and acceptance of the contract's terms must be present. So this relates to an agreement between the two parties must occur. The terms or the requirements of the agreement of the contract, the terms of the contract must be offered to each other and accepted by both parties. So this prevents people from accidentally finding themselves in a contract without intending to enter into a contract. There must be clear offer and acceptance of the contract's terms. Exchange must occur. Now, exchange, that means an exchange of benefit or an exchange of value. And a nice piece of vocab for us to learn here today is consideration. Now, consideration is the technical term to describe the value that's exchanged between the parties. So an example of that would be a worker entering into an employment contract with a business. The worker is exchanging his labor, his efforts, his time to the business, and the worker in return receives from the business wages or money. So between the two parties, one party is exchanging labor and effort, and the other party is exchanging money in return for that effort. So consideration is that technical term that we're going to have to bank away for this part of the course. Next along, people must have capacity to understand the contract. Now, capacity, we're talking about mental capacity. That's the ability to understand the rights and responsibilities of a contract. So if you are unable to understand the rights and responsibilities of a contract due to a range of factors such as a really young age, could be a disability of some kind, could be an injury, or you could be intoxicated. Perhaps you've just gone under surgery for a sporting injury and you've been given some painkillers for your surgery. You cannot enter into a contract if you're intoxicated by those painkillers. So this is about fairness here. We don't want people walking into legally enforceable agreements when at the time of offer and acceptance they did not have the mental ability to understand the rights and responsibilities of the contract. Fifthly, consent must be freely given to enter the contract. So you cannot force someone to enter a contract based on a threat or unethical manipulation. And we had a look at this yesterday with our unfair trade practices and how it's illegal for businesses to coerce customers into buying goods and services. So you couldn't turn up to somebody's house with a gun and go, hey, I love your house, I want to buy it, and force them under the threat of shooting them to sell you their house. That would not mean that there's a valid contract in place. And finally, the activity must be legal. So it is impossible to form a valid contract over an illegal activity, such as a contract killer or selling drugs or contracting somebody to carry out vandalism. Contract law is simply not going to protect and make such an agreement legally enforceable. It would be incredibly bizarre if somebody went to court and sought the court's support to get a judge on board with enforcing an agreement to be carried out when at the same time that agreement is to carry out an activity that's illegal and the judge and the court would be condemning at the same time. So if an agreement has these 6 elements, that agreement is going to be a valid contract. And that valid contract means that the parties have legally enforceable rights and they've got legally enforceable duties. And if one party needs those rights or duties protected or carried out, they can go to court, present the contract and evidence of the contract to the court, and get the court to help them enforce those rights and duties. And today's activity, gentlemen, is just our final activity on the Fair Trading Act, and that is to complete task 14 on page 22 of the workbook. Any questions or issues today, please contact your classroom teacher. Kia kaha.